Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. I'm here today with Terrence O'Neill, a longtime veteran of law enforcement leadership here in Colorado. Terrence and I have worked closely together over the years and share our conversation about navigating one of the most complex transitions and the unique challenges that come when promoting from sergeant to lieutenant. So, Terrence, recently we went through a promotional process at our agency, and I was thinking as we were going through that process, just the processes that I had gone through during the course of my career. And one of the processes that I think can be very, very difficult, one of the positions in a law enforcement agency that can be very, very difficult is the position of lieutenant in an organization. And it's such a big shift from being a sergeant and now coming into the role of a lieutenant. So I thought it'd be a great topic just to kind of talk about, to allow our listeners, those that are sergeants that are maybe thinking about wanting to be a lieutenant, just giving them some tips, thoughts, ideas about what it is that they should be thinking about in preparation of that.
Yeah, that is a tough one. It can be the very top of the lower part of a leadership position in an agency, or it can be the lowest of the top part of the leadership in the agency. And what I mean by that is you have a smaller agency. Sometimes that lieutenant is doing a lot of the things that in a bigger agency a division chief or deputy chief would be in charge of, right, or in control of. And maybe in a larger agency that lieutenant position isn't doing quite so much of those things and is just in charge of and sometimes maybe just a shift of people.
Yeah, and I know, looking back on my own career, and organizations have commanders, they have lieutenants, sometimes they're interchangeable, but when I relate it back to my career, at the time we had sergeant and then you would go to lieutenant. And when I went to the role of lieutenant, there was really kind of a lack of structure when I moved into that position, as far as training me and preparing me to take on those roles. And I guess my sense is that there's a lot of law enforcement agencies that are still in that mode today, because really a lot of times we have a very structured program for our new deputies, for our detectives, and even sometimes we have a structured program for our sergeants when they move into that role. But I've not seen an agency yet really that has a structured program where they take that newly appointed lieutenant offline and they put them through a week, a couple of weeks, whatever would be necessary to really prepare them for what it is that they're going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, and I don't think that's much different from a police department either, a municipal type of agency either, where they're coming straight out of the academy, going to that police department. They have they graduate from the police academy, but now they're going to go to that home base, if you will, or that police department, and they're going to get their own separate training for how they do business day in and day out and what their structure looks like. Because you can't, imagine how many different types of structures and policies or procedurally different agencies do everything, right? And it's all based upon their community desires, their community wants, what's worked in the past and what hasn't. And you're right, there really isn't, and I've been in the career a long time too, I really haven't seen a real structured program to put a lieutenant or a commander through. It's usually something that, well, now that you're going to, if you want to promote into that position, you better have this type of training class under your belt. Well, the nice thing is okay, that'll give you some insight as to what that position should be looking for. But maybe your agency isn't giving you the backside of that. Of now you came back from that training, you took a leadership class. Okay, you know what leadership's about. How do you apply those principles into that position that you're in? So on the backside of that, when you come back from that training, is your agency giving you the training on how to, how to do this leadership stuff? But how do you deal with that person that you were peer sergeants with? It's your buddy, and now you're their boss. That type of stuff is a little different when it's face to face with you once you come back from training. And hopefully, a lot of agencies are taking you or suggesting that you go to a leadership style of strictly for that position that you're coming into. But hopefully, on the back end of that, your agency is coming in and showing you the rest of that.
Right. I think that there's a sense a lot of times that our new lieutenants really don't even know where they fit in what their role is in the organization. So I think it's really important that agencies, and I know that employees don't necessarily have an opportunity to influence that unless they're in that position to influence that. But agencies really need to define the role of a lieutenant within that organization.
Yeah.
Because to your point, in a small police department, in a small sheriff's office, that role of a lieutenant's going to be completely different than it is if you have a large agency where there's multiple lieutenants and multiple layers within an organization. So really that definition and defining those roles and those expectations of what that lieutenant is in your organization becomes very, very important. And really our encouragement would be if the agency isn't doing that for you, sometimes you might have to take that role on yourself and seek that information out.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I recall being promoted to the lieutenant position, commander position, and people looking at you a lot differently. And that happened too when you're a sergeant, right? And sometimes it will in agencies is all of a sudden you made that promotional board or whatnot, and then your peer yesterday now is that you were fine with is kind of giving you the stink eye on the other end, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I didn't change, right? But in their mind, you have changed because now either you're part of them, and that's a bad thing if you're in that position, or they really don't want to lose that relationship that they had with you previously, but it has to change. So there's a lot of struggles to go through as that, and I 100% agree to your point. You have to have clear expectations on what that job title is and what the job is by the agency. If you don't have that right off the bat, you're going to be lost, and then you're going to start creating these divisions because, look, this is why a lot of lieutenants used to die in war, right? Because they got on the ground and the sergeants were running the platoons, and they sent a brand new guy in here that thinks he knows what he's doing. And in reality, he's clueless because they didn't train him, they didn't give him the field experience or whatever. And again, to your point, if you don't have that, you have to have that onus to go out there and find that and be that leader that that your agency needs, not what you need, but what they need and what the community expects.
Yeah, the lieutenant in an organization is really that bridge between really the line and the sergeant and the top of the food chain, the executive staff. They're the ones that are in the position really to be a conduit. And what I mean by that is making sure that things are flowing smoothly from the top to the bottom and the bottom back up to the top. And a real good lieutenant has to be flexible and has to understand that their role is to make sure that there's constantly that flow of information. The other thing that I've seen is dependent upon the number of lieutenants that you have in an organization. There are that many different ways that shifts are being run, or
Yes.
teams are being supervised, and it's really important to make sure that that lieutenant is in a position where they can start bringing consistency to an organization, consistency in the way that they police, consistency in the way that they carry out and develop the mission that the sheriff or the chief of police has set out for an organization. They're, again, really that conduit to their team to make sure that those things are happening, and also making sure that the sheriff or the CEO of an organization is receiving the information that's happening down at the line level. Really, to make an organization successful, that lieutenant plays a key role in that organization.
It's a huge role. It really is, because you are literally playing both sides of the field. So you're right in between the troops on the ground and those decision makers at the top. And if you don't garner the trust and respect of the one side, you're never going to get the other side. Again, you're going to cause this divisiveness and not succeed. The only way that you're going to get that trust and respect is by showing up every day, teaching them, trying to show them that what's important to you on this side is that I am going to be here for you no matter what, and I'm going to try and help you succeed and have a successful career in this law enforcement job, which is tougher every day to have anymore. But we need people to do that. And on the other end of that is all the liability that these folks may not always see. Your job is to look around that corner, look around what's going on in the next state over. Are we going to start seeing an influx of X, Y, or Z? Is it fentanyl? Is it heroin? Is it homelessness? There's all kinds of things that are going on. And at that position, you really need to start looking into the liabilities of the sheriff's office and protecting your people at the same time. It's a very difficult job.
Yeah, and going back to that kind of original question that was posed, you're really a part of both of those teams, and you've really got to be a champion for both.
Yeah.
You have to be a champion for the line, for the troops that are out there getting the job done day in and day out, but also for where it is that the CEO and the executive command staff wants to take an organization, and what that philosophy is. And so I think that there's a lot of times that you step into a role like that, and it's so much different than a sergeant. And I think that there's sometimes when you first get into it, there's the expectation that it's not going to be that much different than a sergeant. And what I have seen is one of the most difficult things for especially a new lieutenant to understand is they are no longer a sergeant, and the role of the sergeant, they have to really release the reins on that and empower the sergeants to do their job. And there's consequences that come if they don't, and there's great benefits that come if they do. So talk about some of those consequences that would happen if a lieutenant gets into a role but is still trying to be the sergeant.
Yeah, that is difficult. If you're in the right mindset and you're doing things for the right reason, and you hopefully were promoted for the right reasons, you should have been doing a great job as that sergeant, right? You should have been building a strong team that's worked together, that's doing things ethically, morally, and for the right reasons, for the community, because you did this job to serve and you're proud to do so. And that sergeant, that type of sergeant has such a strong bond with that shift. Those people that they work with, that they are integrated into them, into that shift every day, day in, day out. Those are their people. They are taking care of them. They are on calls with them. They are making sure they're checking in with them on how their families are doing, whatnot. Now you're asking somebody that's that integrated into that shift and that personable in those people's lives to step away from that and not be involved anymore with that as much, right?
Yeah.
And so now, if you have somebody that gets promoted but still has all these ties, it doesn't mean you just let go of all that, right? And you shouldn't.
Right.
But you do have to draw that line and say, I'm still here for you. I'm here for you, but I can't be the person going call to call with you anymore, right? I have other responsibilities, and it's got to be clearly defined. Again, back to the point. Everything's got to be clearly defined, right? You're still showing that you care for them, but you're doing it in a whole different way. Now I'm making sure that our agency is safe, that we're not, I'm going to try and do whatever I can to keep you out of federal court, out of whatever, and protect you and your livelihood, here at this agency. It's a different role, same, you're still doing the same type of things, but a whole different role.
Right. And really from the agency side, that as you spoke about, that liability that's out there, you start looking at as a lieutenant now, you start looking at the policies for the standing for the SOPs that a division that you're working in might have now, and you start to take on this administrative role that you didn't really have to take on as a sergeant, but it becomes a very, very important role. When you look at a lieutenant that's doing their job well, how do you see that affecting the sergeant and the troops in a positive way?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, you want to be the role model again, right? Of those sergeants that you were with before, or the whole agency, right? You want to continue to be that role model for them and show them that it can be done, regardless of what's going on in your agency. If you can come above and show the people that you are rising above the petty stuff, the daily in and out stuff, but truly supporting the mission of the police department, the sheriff's office, what have you be, I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, I think that when you start looking at, when I look at those lieutenants that I really kind of looked up to, wanted to emulate when I finally got into that role of lieutenant. And I look at the attributes that they brought. They were able to bring that true balance. You could see that they were a champion for the agency, and they were also a champion for their troops, for their platoon, the ones that they were working with on a daily basis. There are different types of leadership courses out there, and I think that it's important from an agency perspective that those that are aspiring to take on the role of lieutenant start to find out from those that are leading the organization where it is that they think that they ought to be spending their time as far as development is concerned. What are some other things that you would encourage a sergeant that's wanting to aspire to be a lieutenant? What would you encourage them to start doing in preparation of being a lieutenant?
Yeah, I think communication is key, just like anything else in a career. I think speaking with as many folks as possible that have been in those shoes before you, trying to find out a vibe of what's going on currently, what's important to, if you're going into a lieutenant or commander's position, what's important to that captain or chief. Start knocking on those doors and trying to garner as much information as you can to educate yourself. And I think the key to that, too, is it opens up that communication line, not only between you and whoever's door you knock on, but they're going to start talking about, hey, so-and-so knocked on my door and started asking me these questions. I think that's really good. What do you think? Right. And that gets that communication going upward also.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's a critical piece, and those can be uncomfortable at the beginning when you start to have that approach, and hopefully our listeners have supervisors that are in those positions that welcome that type of conversation and really are have a desire to build strong leaders within their organization. But some of this we've got to take on ourselves, the individual that wants to move into that role, and having those conversations and taking that step forward, showing that initiative
Yes.
that's where it is that they want to get to. It's going to lead to kind of to your comments that they're going to start being some of those respected and successful folks within the organization. Obviously, if they're looking at the lieutenant rank, they are currently a sergeant. And one of the things that I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that was given to me is to start to carry yourself like somebody in that next higher rank. So if you're a deputy and you want to become a sergeant, start carrying yourself and start making decisions and start thinking about the role that the sergeant is playing that you're working for, and what would you do in those situations. Start putting yourselves into that position. And it's no different for the lieutenant rank. If you're a sergeant and you're starting to think about becoming a lieutenant, you've really got to start putting yourself in that lieutenant's shoes so that you start to understand the decisions that are being made. Now, I would caution folks from questioning sometimes why a lieutenant made a decision, especially if you don't necessarily agree with that decision. But there are constructive ways to really start to have those conversations with those that are in that lieutenant role, so that you can start to understand why they're making the decisions that they're making, and start putting yourself in that role. Start walking like, talking like, acting like a lieutenant. So much so that you find yourself in a position where people around you are, when you bring up the fact that you might go for the next lieutenant's promotion, nobody is surprised at that.
Right.
Because of your conduct and the way that you present yourself on a daily basis in the role that you currently play in an organization.
Yeah. No, that's great. Great commentary. And it's funny. We always we talk about doing things for certain reasons, and when you're a brand new cop or whatnot, and you're hopefully your FTO is pretty spot on and sharp, and telling you to always play the what if game. What if this happens? Right. What if this happens? Start thinking about that thing so that your mind is already prepared for, okay, I went through this scenario. If this happens, if that door opens up right now, what am I going to do? Am I sitting in my car? Am I getting them out of my car? And what am I doing, right? I agree 100%. You shouldn't change that line of thinking. Okay, if this happens, what am I going to do? Right. Regardless of your rank. Start having those conversations with yourself and be prepared for that stuff. And that's just going to show others, both below and above, in rank structure, that you're committed to the mission, committed to the agency, and committed to serving the people. Yeah,
and I think the last piece of advice that I would give in a lieutenant's role, that's now going to be kind of your first exposure to starting to get more involved in things outside the organization as opposed to inside the organization. What I mean by that is you really need to start paying attention to what your bosses are doing, what's important to either the city that you're working for or the county that you're working in. How is it that you start to get involved in the community or in business, and sometimes that looks like getting involved in Rotary. Sometimes it looks like getting involved in a metro-wide leadership program where there's different folks in business that are going through this leadership program, kind of a community leadership program. I know that I've had the opportunity to go through a couple of those over the course of my career, and you start to get involved with the community as a whole. And I believe in that lieutenant's position, that's really kind of the first time you start scratching that surface and you really start to understand what makes a community tick. And if we want to have, as a law enforcement organization, if we want to have kind of legitimacy in policing in that organization, we've got to be involved in the community and what it is that they're doing. And the lieutenant's the one that really starts to get involved in those community meetings with those community members and starts to develop a reputation within the community, not just in the organization, but in the community itself.
Yeah. Are you going to actually, does the buck stop here, or does it continue kicking it down the road, kick the can down the road? And that's absolutely that lieutenant's role is taking that information in, prioritizing it, figuring out what the community needs, while also meeting the needs of your folks too in the agency. Right, we're not going to go completely 180 degrees on, okay, well, you guys suck because you're not out doing X, Y, or Z, to our people and our agencies, or as we shouldn't be. But at the same time, we're valuing everything that community members are telling us in the community meetings, or just out on the, at wherever you're at. Smaller town stuff, you might just see people in the grocery store and say, hey, there's something going on in this neighborhood, and I just want you to know about it, and for your safety, just make sure that you give me a phone call. I mean, it's very important to be very community-oriented and actually mean it, actually show. It's one thing to say something that you're going to do something. It's a whole different thing if your actions follow up with that and complete that mission.
Yeah. Leaders in our organizations are very, very important. And as you move up in rank, you start to see more of the vision of the entire agency and what its role is in the agency. And a lot of times at the sergeant level, we don't see that. It's our sergeants are responsible and should be focused on their team and the plan of the day, how it is that we, from an operational perspective, we're able to carry out what it is that we need to carry out. A lieutenant really needs to, that's the first time in an organization at that rank that you really start to see the vision of your CEO, of your sheriff as to what our role is in a community, and really start to understand and direct, guide, mentor other team members to start moving in that direction. So I would tell you from moving from the rank of sergeant to the rank of lieutenant, it is a huge step in an organization. It's not just the next step. It's a huge step from sergeant to lieutenant, and a lot of times people think just because you're a good sergeant means that you're going to be a good lieutenant, and that is not always the case. But as we know, leaders are not born; leaders are made, and if that's truly a position that you want to attain, then there are things that you can do and should do to prepare, and really leaning into developing yourself, taking on that role and that responsibility becomes key to that. And we hope that we've helped you just a little bit in preparing for that next rank in your organization. It's been an honor and a joy to be with you this afternoon, and as always, we just hope that you just keep leading in your organization. Thank you. That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion. Until next time, stay safe and remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thank you for your commitment to law enforcement. We're honored to be a part of your journey to success. Let's elevate our call to service together.